close by to the town, and so then, of course, you know, where there are Amish desserts, and so we sniffed them out, and I brought them back, so please don't make me take them back to my Airbnb. It's too much. Please help me.
Well, folks, thank you so much for coming. We're so glad you're here. My name is Susan. I work for Carmichael's as the events coordinator. I was so pleased that Rachel contacted us, letting us know that she was around the area and able to stop by and join us all to present this wonderful new book. And David, also a great friend of the store, has come in to ask all the right questions. And we would encourage you to do as well at the end of the presentation. Because you support brick and mortar bookstores, we can have flesh and blood authors. So thank you so much for being here. You being here allows us to be here, so thank you so much. David Dominé is a Louisville-based author of numerous books about Kentucky and its past. From ghost stories to bourbon recipes, his writings bring to life the spirits of old Louisville. I see what you did there. And exuberant and exciting. And, oops, sorry about that. I'm just started reading glasses this year, so. Rachel M. Harper is the author of the novels Brass Ankle Blues and This Side of Providence, which was shortlisted for the Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence. Her work has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize and has been widely published and anthologized. Harper has received fellowships from Yaddo and McDowell and is on faculty at Spalding University School of Writing, where we have an event this Saturday. I encourage you to join us for that. She lives in Los Angeles, but we're lucky to have her here in the Ohio River Valley. Everybody give it up for Rachel Wagner.
Thanks, everyone. I'm so happy to see you all. I'm so happy to be in my second home of Louisville. And yeah, as most of you know, the book has been out about 4 or 5 months now. And as we know, those of us who, publish books, got an independent press, supporting independent bookstores. We sort of work the book for however many months or years you can. So I'm really thrilled to be back here. And many of you, I feel like, have been on the journey with me because I've been working on this book for the better part of about a decade now. Which is, wow, we can get into that later if anyone has questions about that process, publishing, editorial, the ups and downs of it all. So we'll start out. I'm just going to read a little bit, just 5 minutes maybe from the book, and then David and I will have some questions, and then we'll open it up and happy to answer questions from you guys too. Okay, so I think you have a sense of what the book is about. I'm going to read, it's separated into 7 books, which follow 7 different characters at different times, and this is a saga, as they told me. That was never my word when I was working on it, but now it's a generational saga, and I'm just like, okay. So I'm going to read from book 3, which was the other mother's perspective, and this is after she has not seen the little boy that she was raising since he was 2 years old, and he shows up in the restaurant where she is working without anyone. Okay. Standing in the dim light of the restaurant, Juliet recognizes her son instantly, even though she hasn't seen him in more than 16 years. Jenry was just over 2 years old that final time, asleep in the crib she'd assembled a week before his birth, wearing his favorite penguin pajamas. She's thought of that day often over the years, almost daily in fact. But in this moment, now that he's in front of her, she feels as if she'd imagined the scene and has been replaying someone else's memory all these years. Feet peeking through the slats, curls damp against his forehead, how his mouth was slightly opened like he was about to speak. It all comes back to her in that first instant. He is taller than she would have imagined, at least 6 feet, which makes him several inches taller than her brother, almost the height of her father. His hair is shaved close to the scalp, so there are no curls to recognize, but his nose is the same, a button like his mother, and he still has those ridiculously deep dimples. She has longed for this moment, but now that it's here, she doesn't know what to do, how to be. Her mind races, though her body stands still. The timing is terrible. Her staff is about to arrive for the dinner rush, and she has to prepare the duck for tonight's special, mix a marinade for the pickled beets, and whip 4 pounds of cream cheese into a frosting for the spice cake baked this morning. But none of that matters. This moment is his. He looks around the room, scanning every corner. I'm looking for Juliet, he says. The sound of her name coming from his mouth startles her. She doesn't know what to say, how to speak even. He hands her a business card, but she doesn't take it. She has forgotten how to move. The next thing she knows, they are talking, but she can't really hear their voices. She is underwater, a swimmer looking up through the choppy surface above, seeing only the dappled light, the image of the sun in double, stretching and bending like a bright bubble in the clouded sky. They are talking about the past, what he already knows, and what he wants her to tell him, beginning with the truth. She knows there is no such thing. There is what she remembers and what she did, what they both did. The truth is complicated, she begins. For years, I didn't know it myself. She has a faint desire to laugh from the absurdity of it all and from the blissful relief of waiting years for something to happen and finally having it occur. I was young and selfish, she says. I thought it would always be there for me whenever I was ready. It meaning you, your mother, the family we created. He nods his head, jaws clenched, the one you didn't want. Is that what she told you, that I didn't want you? He doesn't answer, but she can see it on his face. Marissa's version of the story, coloring his body like a pigment. She wants to deny it, defend herself, but realizes it's better to wait. Let him go first. His anger is not greater than hers, but it's closer to the surface, so she allows him to dip into it, wetting his hands. She listens as he talks about his mother, how Juliet left her and left him behind, and it's like plunging her hands into the well, soaking her body with a rage she thought she buried long ago. But it doesn't look like rage. It looks like heartache. The loss of him fills her body, courses through her veins, and now, as her memories replay over and over, she can't help but feel it all. The sadness, the loss, the love she had, and perhaps still has for him, flowing into her limbs, making her skin twitch, her fingers ache, till it spills from her eyes as tears. She sees his own eyes fill as he says he doesn't understand. Why did you let her take me away from you, he asks, his voice trembling. If you really believed I was your son. His words hit her like the aftershock of a bomb. She steps back, tries to keep her balance. Look, why don't we meet some other time? Maybe you can come back. No, he says quickly, shaking his head like he's trying to remove the wrong idea. I think I should leave. From the corner of her eye, she sees the kitchen door swing open, her sous chef slipping inside with a tray. Jenry walks towards the front door, and the sight of him leaving makes her heart seize up in her chest. She calls after him. You must think it's crazy, some wild tale we've concocted to ruin your life, but this wasn't what we planned. She walks closer, drawn in like a magnet. I never thought it would turn out like this, or I swear I wouldn't have done it. He stands at the door. Done what? Left me, or agreed to have me in the first place? She doesn't know him, this man he's become, but she recognizes a part of him, the calm, thoughtful person who first entered the restaurant looking for her, the peaceful baby who always wanted to share his toys. Leaving wasn't my choice, not completely, she argues. Well, now maybe we would have another chance. To do what? Relive my childhood? He spits the words out, but there's something else she sees beneath the anger, a nervousness she didn't expect. She watches him button and rebutton the pocket on his cargo shorts. It reminds her of Marissa, how she used to play with her clothing when she got anxious, the frayed edge of her jeans, the buckle on a pair of boots. Seeing the similarity between mother and son underscores their genetic bond, a connection that simultaneously thrills and devastates her. Here he is, the boy she knew, all grown up now. And to recognize Marissa in him only serves to strengthen the link to their shared past. This is the baby she loved, the young man she dreamed of but never knew. Here, now, in the flesh. All right, I'll stop there.
So Rachel picked a very boring conversation partner. So I'm going to start off with just like a standard one. So inspiration behind this, what was it?
Okay. It was multifaceted. I'd say, for me, the kind of central like tagline of the story, as far as the two moms and the son and the breakup and the sort of disappearance of the son, is only one aspect that I really wanted to navigate. I think I was trying to deal with a lot of different levels of familial loss. So, as those of you who've read the book or who plan to read it will see, there's a lot of different connections, like dyads and triads of relationships. So there's like the two moms and the baby and that they have. There's him now as an 18-year-old going to college, trying to reconnect in a way with Juliet and see what's happening there. And then in terms of the past, there's Juliet and her relationship with her father, and the other mom, Marissa, her relationship with her dad, which are really pivotal to not only each woman's sort of identity and sense of being a parent, but just what happens in the plot of the story. And those were equally important to me. My relationship with my father was really pivotal in a lot of different points in my life, and then there were fractures to that involving other family members, and I kind of mirrored some of that in the book. I also was interested in a sibling dynamic, which is between Juliet and her brother, who again, because the book kind of moves through time a little bit in the past, and there's like a loss there. And I also had an early loss of one of my brothers. And so I feel that it was sort of like the wounds, several different wounds that I had experienced came to be like woven together in an interesting way in the book. And as I've said before, like writing it was a way of kind of like working through some of those things and working them out, but also just wanting to evolve as a person. I don't know if others of you I know are writers, and sometimes it's like we write to kind of, at least I do, to understand something that's already happened, to really kind of like work through it in a different way than just digesting it, but really understand like maybe why you did what you did or why other people did, or just to try to have compassion and to try to grow. And I know that making alternative families breaking up and restructuring is something that I've experienced in like many different forms as a child, as an adult, breaking up families, making families, reconfiguring, blending families, like all those lines of connection and loss are really important to me, and I feel like they can be very fraught, but as far as like conflict and kind of necessary tension and for narrative, I feel like it was rich. So I was willing to weave them together. And as I was just saying to someone before the reading, it's like I worked so long on this book, it kept kind of getting bigger and sprawling because I was interested in those different relationships, not just the central one of the two moms and the boy, but really understanding how our families and our different dynamics play into all our relationships. So how these women try to understand what it is going to be like to be a mom was about them being daughters and how they were going to make sense of that. So I was interested in like kind of all those layers.
So the son of the other mother in the book is named Jenry, which is a unique name, and the reader gets an explanation of how that comes about. But I was curious, how do you go about choosing names when you come up with characters?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's so important for me. You know, sometimes when I work on a piece like my first novel started out as a short story, and the short story got published, and it's actually not the same name as the character in the novel. And that's because it needed to evolve. And it's funny, because for me, and character names, especially like your protagonist and your main character, is so important. A lot of times when it's right, things will just sync up, because I really believe like people come to like embody their names in different ways. So I feel like it's very important. I knew, specifically, I wanted him to have this unique name and to have it kind of be singular and then be referencing like family, which you learn in the book how that happens. But I think I spend like a lot of time, I collect lists. It started when I was very young and I wasn't even a writer, but I was kind of obsessed with names. I'm really not sure why. I just always like had little lists of names, and when I was like in middle school, I used to, when I would go to the movie theater like in person before years of streaming and everything, I would wait and watch all the credits, and I would write down different names. And I would never take like a full person's name. I would always take a last name and then a first name over there, and I just had an ongoing list. And I, believe it or not, like I've collected a lot of them and like kept them, and I'll go back to them, and now I have it like on my phone as a note. I have my names list, because it's kind of obsessive, but I do really spend a lot of time, and I will rename characters and have it really click, have like kind of in a revision where it's like, there's something always just like a little bit off about it. And it's hard when you've got a name and you're working on something, like as long as I was working on this, like once I started working with a woman who's named Marissa, and I remember thinking like, oh no, like if I publish this book, she might somehow think I'm like naming this character after her. So then I have to like say to people, you know, I'm using your name in my book because I don't, you know, but then other times you want to give people like a kind of a nod to names. And in this book I did something a little bit funny. I always like hide a certain names sometimes in books. So like, for example, there's a character that I have the characters that are all fictional, but I haven't mentioned like a couple of real professors. That to me was like a shout out, that like some of the professors that I really love, I haven't like mentioned them. And like my brother's cat I used in the book, where it's like that's really like the cat's name and description. And it's just kind of like a gift to me sometimes too, where someone will be reading it's like, oh my gosh, you know, they're talking about my cat. I just think it's kind of like a wink. But the name thing I feel like is very, very important. And I feel like it has to be right in terms of like, you know, the history and ethnicity and like names that people would use and the time of like real, like I don't pull something that doesn't feel like it would work for like where that person's from and, you know, that kind of thing.
Do you have a favorite girl's name?
In general or in this book?
In general.
Well, yes, and I gave it to my oldest daughter. And it's actually not even a girl's name, but my daughter's name is Auden, and she's named after the poet W.H. Auden. And when my dad, who's a poet, was reading, and throughout my whole life, he would always talk about poets and always talk about them by their last name. So as I was a little kid in the audience, he would always be saying Auden. I would hear him talk about Auden. And I just thought it sounded very, very pretty and unique. And I knew after, and, you know, my name isn't super popular, but I was sort of traumatized in elementary school when, after having been the only Rachel, like another Rachel moved to town, and then I had to be Rachel H. And I was like, why am I Rachel H? I've been here my whole life. This girl should be Rachel B. Like, but it's like, I don't know why. They just made me Rachel H, and I really didn't like it. And I wanted a more unique name. My brothers had more unique names. They like never ran into their names growing up. So I think that was part of it.
Names? Their
names were Roland, which I've actually met more Rolands old now, but when we were kids, there was never a Roland. And then my other brother's name was Patrice, which, you know, he was named after Patrice Lumumba, but a lot of, you know, when occasionally, maybe when we were like 20, we met like a female Patrice, but there were never any male Patrices. So because of that, I was like, oh, I want to have a kid one day and named them Auden, and I wanted it to be for a girl, but I didn't know, and I didn't know what I was having, and then I did end up naming her Auden, and she's never run into another Auden, but I'm sure there are a few out there, but thankfully they weren't in her class, so she didn't have to deal with that.
And how about a favorite guy's name?
I have so many. Let's see, it's really hard to narrow it down. Let's see. I'm trying to think if I've named any of my characters. When I was still having kids, i.e. like thinking I was gonna have to name, I was such a name hoarder. I would not tell any, I was like afraid someone would steal my name. So it's like my favorite names are probably not even in any of my work because I don't want to give them any kind of advertising. But now that I'm no longer having children and it's too soon for me to worry about my grandchildren and trying to buy for what I want my kids to name them. Let me think here. I do like a unique name, but it's totally I'm blanking. Do you have any favorite names? Are you happy with David?
I just chop liver name. It's nothing special.
And are you okay with that?
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm feeling fancy, I'll call myself W.D.
W.
Italian version.
Ah.
But yeah, I got a pretty boring name. But I'm fascinated by old-fashioned names, and sometimes there's names that were beautiful when they were popular, but now they're kind of ugly. Like Ethel. Would anyone name their kid Ethel nowadays? That's kind of an ugly name.
Right.
So what are
Yes.
What are some ugly names for you that you know?
And I actually had an Ethel in my family too. A great grandmother was an Ethel. And there's a lot of Ruths in my family, which it's it feels a little bit plain. I have an ancestor whose first name was Plummer, with a double M, not a B. And I always thought that was sort of weird, but also interesting. And I sort of contemplated using that at some point for a character maybe. But I feel bad because if you say, as soon as you say this is not the name, then I'm gonna meet someone who's gonna come up to me and be exactly, I'm Olga or whatever,
So I guess Olga's an ugly name for you.
Right, I don't want to judge anyone, but yeah, I like old names too, old-fashioned, like Alistair, and things that you don't hear a lot, or different cultures, and then you go to Ireland and you hear them all the time, but here it would be very strange.
Alistair Cook or Alistair Crawley? Which one would you like better?
Cook, I think I have to go for. Well, I had a friend whose father's name is Alistair, so I think of him first.
I'd go with Alistair Crawley. I like Satanists better. Hedonists. So I was at this Southern Book Fest in Nashville the night before last, and I was at an event. It was called Authors in the Round, and people were silly enough to pay money to sit at a table with me and talk about my book. And so there was a bunch of authors. There were some good Kentucky writers. Silas House was there, Emily Bingham, Lee Cook. I don't know if anyone has read his book, Groundskeeping, which is really, really good, I think. He was there. But beforehand, they had us do this icebreaker thing. They asked us questions that were supposed to generate conversation. I thought it was going to be at each individual table, but no, they had a huge stadium-sized screen in the event space, and as everyone was eating, different responses would pop up.
Oh wow!
And so one of the questions was 2 books you think everyone should read, and I said Charlotte's Web and Tales of the City. So what are 2 books you think everyone should read besides the other mother?
Right. I would say Beloved, and let's see, probably my first book that I read and that I really remember reading as a child was The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And I've continued to reread it throughout my life, and I don't know why I was reading it at like 8 years old on a bridge, you know, it's a little intense. But I was, and it's really the first book I remember reading before I got into like all my sort of kids' books that I read and loved. But I just grabbed it from the shelf, and I think, I think, you know, as far as being American, those two are pretty important to understand something about it.
Another question was, who's your favorite literary character? And I said Templeton the Rat from Charlotte's Web.
So
Well,
Charlotte's Web is really,
Yeah, that.
well, I loved Charlotte's Web too.
Did you like Templeton the Rat?
No.
The Pauline voice.
Right. No, let's see. My favorite literary character. That's such an interesting question. Do you mean favorite in the sense of like someone I'd actually want to like be with, or more like it's really well done, like from the writer's perspective?
Just what's a character that has been in literature that is your favorite? Maybe that sticks with you the most.
Let's see. That is so tough. I feel like
That's why I said Templeton the Rat. That's kind of funny. I said Charlotte's Web. I'll say Templeton the Rat.
I mean, so many have stuck with me. But God, I should have something like more prepared. Let's see here.
Well, they'll come to you. Just when it pops up, it'll come to you and then tell us.
Okay.
Another interesting question they gave for us was your biggest time waster, like when you're writing. And I said bourbon. What are yours?
Oh, I have so many. First of all, I do laundry. Like, I could do laundry for my neighbors. I mean, I'm just doing the laundry. It's like crazy. And I also like, you know, cutting my fingernails. That's like important. It's just always like, oh, that needs to be done right now. Like anything to avoid. But yeah, laundry is my favorite.
Okay. So let's go back to the book now. I remember, in case you didn't know, Rachel was my first mentor when I did the MFA at Spalding. And I remember one of the first comments you made when I got feedback from like one of my first or second submission. No, it was not. It was I had a character lie, and you said, "I love it when people lie." 3 exclamation points. So tell us about the people that lied in the book.
Well, there are a lot of liars in my book. I think they do lie sort of for the right reasons. I like to think. I do like when people lie, certainly in fiction, you know, I think it's hard in real life, but it also happens, you know, so it's okay. But I think it's interesting that like to have people, even if it's not like a horrible lie, just to say something different from what you mean. I find even in my own life, I don't always tell the full truth because I'm always gauging what the situation needs. Like if it's my kids, like what they can handle. They can't always handle the whole truth. So I'm, you know, pulling back. And I just like the complexities of that. Other times, I just don't want to be as transparent, which is just probably my own issue, where I'm like holding something back. But do you want me to talk about the certain lies or just specific characters that lie?
Yeah.
In my book, I mean, I think that, you know, the grandfather in the book tells, you know, some lies that are pretty big. But again, you know, there's some redemptive arcs happening there. But I think a lot of times I have compassion for people who lie because they feel like they don't have a choice. Like, you know, like, so if it's someone that feels like it's not going to be safe for them to tell the truth for whatever reason, I like that. I like it as a sort of a setup in fiction because it creates tension and conflict right away because you immediately know, like, you know, what would have happened if they told the truth and what's the other person on the other side of the lie going to feel, and then you immediately have people at odds. So I think lies are a good sort of source of conflict, and with plotting, I'm always thinking of like either a lie or just something that, you know, you think it's going this way and then something else happens. I mean, just as sort of like a diversion.
Was there any of your father and the grandfather character?
Yes, quite a bit.
I knew some things about your father, but when that character made his first appearance, I was like, that's Rachel's father.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, he passed away like 5 years ago, and so he never read the book. I wouldn't have had a problem though. Like I wish he was still here to see it, because I feel that not only does it feel sort of accurate in a way, but more importantly, it's sort of like I pulled out some of the traits that he wouldn't have, like being hard on people and being sort of demanding. He felt like it was necessary as far as being a parent, as being a professor, you know, so he wouldn't have felt badly about that part. And he was a real force, a force of nature, like the character. I have had several of his students reach out to me, and that's been nice. You know, people have been like, oh my gosh, you know, I feel like it's a portrait. Again, it's fictionalized, but the elements that are like my dad are nice. It was nice for me to remember. It was hard. Like at one point, you know, I was in the middle of working on the book when he died, and I put it down for a while because it was, even though I had already written all of that, just to go back into the scenes that I created and the way that I'd sort of channeled his energy and his presence, it was hard for me to be back in that, knowing he's gone, knowing that it was only going to exist now in my memory and everyone who knew him, and now in this sort of pseudo-fictionalized version I created, which now I feel, after sort of grieving, I feel like it's a gift that I've given myself in a way, but at the time it just was very painful to look at that. And same thing with my brother. You know, it's interesting because you never know in life what is going to happen. And I had already written the book, and I'd had, you know, and in an accident, you know, Juliet's brother dies when they're young. And my brother ended up dying after I'd written the book, but I was like in the revision process. But it was interesting because even, again, they're not related so much as far as like what's happening and the type of person, but just I feel that I was writing my way into the loss of a relationship that even while my brother was alive, there was a lot of estrangement because of some of his issues, addiction, and alcoholism issues, mental health issues. But it's like I worked through a lot of that terrain and just the loss, and then all of a sudden when he died, it was like, oh my gosh. And I was again back there rewriting the book, realizing all this stuff that I had these characters sort of work out, that I had, it was almost like prescient or something, because I didn't realize I was gonna have to be coming face to face with that in the same way. So again, it's been interesting, you know, when you work on something as long as I'm working on this, it's like, you know, people are dying, people are born, I mean, you know, divorces happen, I mean, just like a lot of life has happened in these years. But I'm still sort of grateful that I kept going with it, and finally seeing it, you know, in this published phase, because there were so many moments when I wasn't sure, you know, I was gonna ever be done with it. It almost was like, is this gonna be like Ralph Ellison's second novel, which like came out after he died? So, you know, he worked on it for 50 years.
Well, let me ask you one more question, and I wish that other people ask questions. But as we saw, the other mother is a chef, and so there's various times where we have some foods involved. Any favorite foods you included, and why?
Yes, I mean, I had to cut a lot of the food stuff, actually. I wrote even more. I mean, again, I love eating, I love cooking, I love food, so I like putting, I love people write about food, you know. To me, it's one of the sensory things that really helps you sort of, you know, transport yourself. So I like writing about food, and I think the scene where Marissa cooks for Juliet as part of like her trying to court her in a certain way, like that meal is a meal that, like I had a Puerto Rican friend gave me, tips back in my 20s when I wanted to like know different types of food, different ethnic foods that I didn't grow up with. So that is a big deal. And like, I think I cut a lot, but I had a whole Italian food section because where I grew up in Providence, I grew up near in the Italian neighborhood, and we had an Italian art painter in our building, but he was also a chef. And so I like kind of grew up by his side, watching him cook, and I just loved the amounts, the volume with Italians, But yeah, I mean, I have to pull that stuff back. My agent was like, "This is great, but like, it's not. We don't need it in this book. If you ever want to write about, some sort of cookbook, memory lane thing, we could put it in that." So I did. Believe it or not, even though it's like 430 pages or something, at one point it was like almost 500 pages, which feels crazy. It's not like I ever wanted, before I wrote my first book, I remember being like, how do people write anything? My longest short story was like 17 pages. It was like, how did anyone do this? I never thought I could do it. And then that book was like more of a standard, like 250 pages or something. And I was just like, wow. And then I never thought I would write a big book. And my last one was bigger too. It's not that I want you guys to be carrying around these tomes, but I guess I'm just maybe a little bit wordy and, big. Or I tried with this one to, at least with the perspectives and stuff, to have it justify its length. But your book is pretty big too. Did you find it hard, sort of dealing within the editing process with hundreds of pages?
Yeah, we had to whittle some down when it was longer, but it was.
Yeah.
I was afraid my publisher would want major edits and cut out things and change things around. They pretty much, some line edits and take up this little bit here and there. They pretty much just took what I gave them and published it.
That's great.
50% more than they wanted.
Right.
I was happy.
Yeah. And I like a big book as a reader, once you commit, and it's just like, I like it to not end too quickly.
Yeah. Well, how about on the audience who has a question?
Are you a pianist?
Not in many years. As a child, I did study the piano. And then it's funny because when I was working on this, my kids were at like various stages of their playing and practicing. But I had a couple of good friends who were pianists, and we talked about things, and I had them read sections and like make sure it sounded right, like that I was doing everything right. Are you?
No, well, I'm not very good, but I love the play. But I was very impressed with how that came across.
Thank you. Yeah, I had to definitely do that research,
And I like
make
the scene
sure.
where the young man goes and plays on the piano. Is it outside of his father's office? Or his
Oh, the grandfather's office,
Yeah,
yeah.
I love that scene.
Thank you. Other questions?
So you talked about, or you mentioned that, you came back to this book after a long time and everything else. What did you remember your relationship to the characters changing over that period? Your experiences and what you transferred to them?
That's a really good question. I think I wouldn't say I had my favorites earlier, but I had the ones that I related to more. I think I related to their story and sort of their struggle. And as I took breaks and came back and got some feedback, I realized I had to have that same generosity and understanding of some of the other ones. I had to really make sure that I was fleshing everyone out to the same degree. And that was hard because I think I did have to evolve Rachel the person, not the novelist, but in terms of things that I thought I was okay with and that I'd gotten over, that I realized I had more work to do. I had more forgiveness. I had more acceptance. And then I could look at those characters too and give them the same, the same sort of tenderness and really understanding from their perspective and not having any kind of judgment. And that was harder than I thought it was going to be. And a lot of the things, a lot of the plot stuff things are fictionalized, but underneath some of the emotional things are truer for me. So it's still, I felt like, oh, you know, this happens, that happens, like these are all the fictional elements. It's not gonna be hard for me to sort of imagine my way in, but I realized I had blocks of like, where I couldn't really understand, and and so some of that distance and some of the life stuff, I think losing people and some of the deaths, I had a divorce in the middle, there was lots going on where I then was like, okay, I have to really like come again and see things differently, and just the space too, the time. I mean, before COVID, I feel like I put it down for maybe like 9 months or something, and then I got a new agent, and then I got like new notes, but I couldn't face them for like several months. And like at the beginning of COVID, it's like everybody was like doing all these great things, and I was like obsessed with, Fauci and like reading the New York Times. Like I was not working. I was just like worried, and other people I was hearing were like, doing Pilates at home and, whatever. And I'm like, wow, I was really jealous. And all of a sudden by like May, June, I was like, okay, pull yourself together. And then I went deep and finally did that like last pass. And all of that time and distance really helped me see them all kind of evenly. And then I was able to realize like they weren't all at the same level, and I really wanted to work to the best that I could to have all 7 of the books put like up here. And like I might feel like my favorites, like readers, some are like, oh, my favorite book was this, my favorite characters. I mean, that's fine, but I at least wanted to feel like I had done as even and fair as I could. And it's not just about page count, but just about like how deep I went into the story. And I had to be open to taking some of my editor's ideas too, and he was pretty helpful with the feedback of wanting like a little bit more backstory about this one or that one, in light of what I was doing with other ones. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So this is really fascinating. I'm just wondering if you think of this, is this compassion for your characters, or are you building empathy for them, or are you just mechanical is the wrong word, but just baldly, as a writer, trying to paint a full picture of them? I mean, is it?
I think both. I think for me, because some of the, like I was saying, some of the material where I was writing the book to kind of get over some of the losses in my own life, that I felt like part of my growth as a person was about having empathy for these characters I had created, because underneath them were some of the true, real people, family members, in my own life that I had issues with or detachments from. And then so I really felt, for me, I mean, I don't know that all writers are like that, but I needed to have that more empathy for the characters, so that I could have empathy for like a real human being who would do that, so that then I could sort of grow and really let things go that I was holding on to. And then also I do think as a writer, I wanted to have enough understanding to make them, fully realized characters to the same level as maybe some of the characters that was like easier for me to step into their shoes, some of the other ones. And I wanted to feel, like equal, like I had doled out the humanity for all of the main characters as equally as one can. It's art, it's not science, and I'm a human being, but like I felt like in earlier drafts it was very clear that I still have like a little bit of judgment about this one, and I'm like a little bit like looking down on that one, and I had to be able to work through that as a writer and a person. Yeah.
As both a writer and a teacher, I wonder if working on this book for such a long time, coming back to it and rethinking characters and that sort of thing, is there anything from this book in particular that you think you've learned about writing that you will be passing on to your students?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I feel like there's got to be so much, because I think I definitely learned a lot and grew as a writer. I hope I've grown with every book, you know, that's my plan. I mean, I think a lot of us are realizing like we're always evolving, we're always wanting to get better. I think a couple lessons that I feel like I've already shared with my students just in these last couple of years in the process of that tenacity and of like just the not giving up is really important, because I know for me with this book, I didn't necessarily feel like I knew who my audience was. Like I didn't know that people would relate, that like, you know, people felt like, oh, like, you know, this book is for them. Like I'm writing about all these things that feel very like esoteric, and, you know, I'm weaving it all together. And I've just been really like blown away by the different people who read the book and responded about and being really moved, and I'm like, wow. And so things like that, like when, you know, you've been working on something, you've got, you know, you're teaching, you're doing this, you're raising kids, like you're not, it was hard for me to really feel like my own drive of like this matters, it matters to anyone beyond me. And I think that that's just an important lesson, and I know a lot of my students too, you know, I mean, you're unpublished until you're not, but like when you are, you're just like, you don't know if it's ever gonna happen, you don't know if it, you know, you just have this dream. And I think it's important to get that reminder over and over again. And I also think just from like a craft perspective, you know, I definitely in revisions learned a little bit different about the revision process for me, of like the importance of having, I mean, I've always been an outliner to a degree, but again, because of the structure is a little bit like complicated, the way the book's put together, I had to rely even more like on an outline and really like being clear about how it's gonna weave together and feel natural. Like I'm moving through time a little bit, I'm going, you know, from character to character, and that I think was really important. I mean, it's like I've been giving that, you know, outline essay before. I say these things, but now I have like a whole new understanding of, you know, for something that can be big and feel like it can overwhelm you, to have that as a guide through, and to be able to like have faith in that, because you can also come in the process, like this never happened to me, but imagine if I had come up against like my agent or an editor who'd been like, you know, oh, we don't think there should be this many books, or we you know, like, and if I hadn't been so confident because I had crafted the outline in such a way that, you know, like a lot of times people can convince you to do things you don't want to do, or, you know, it's good to have that resolve. But when you're a newer writer or you're unpublished, like it can, you know, you just want it to happen, so you might give in. And I feel like working on something and like coming to terms with what it needs and feeling confident in that was really important for me throughout, so that I felt ready if I was gonna like come up against certain walls. And I never did, but I was kind of expecting it, because it is like, it's a unique structure, and you know, I don't know that everyone would have supported that, but that luckily my team did, and you know, and I've gotten positive feedback so far. But again, when you're in the trenches, you don't know, you don't know. Are you just loving it because, you know, you did it? Is it because you've worked on it so long that it's familiar, that it feels like it's working? Like, is familiarity the same thing as working? You know, like all that, which is why the downtime in between also helped me. Because then I knew, when I was coming back to things that I didn't remember writing whole paragraphs, then I knew, okay, this is a good sign, because I'm not just loving like my prose or something. I'm like, I don't even remember doing any of this. I'm like, what am I even talking about here? But it's like, that's good, because that means that I can actually look at it like it's my students' work, or like a book in the library, you know, and it's just like, okay, I can be objective. Is this working? Like, is this necessary? So all that was like really important. And I plan to share all that with my students as I do.
Well, great. I think time's wrapping up, and I know people want book signing, so
Okay.
let's
Yes.
do a book signing. And thanks to Rachel Harper. It was great being in conversation with her.
Thanks everybody for coming out. I really appreciate it. Yes, please come up. I'll sign kind books.
It smells really
Good.
good.
Get more desserts, please.
You have a
And-
picture, Rachel.
Yes, we need a picture.
You want to take a picture? Let's have the mics in front of our faces. Hi.
Yes, yes, Kelly. Hiding out the chance.
So many options.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Susan, it's like we could pull this table up.